Ladies and gentlemen, silence has a way of stripping away excuses and exposing effort in its purest form. When communication pauses between two people, the usual flow of routine messages, check-ins, and small talk disappears, and what remains is intention. Many people say they care. Many people claim they are busy, confused, stressed, or overwhelmed. But when there is distance and no conversation, effort becomes a choice rather than a habit. The person who truly values the connection feels the gap and responds to it. They don't just notice the silence, they feel responsible to break it. They look for a way back into dialogue, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if pride has to be swallowed. Real care is proactive, not passive. It moves toward resolution instead of waiting for convenience. On the other side, when someone stays silent and makes no move at all, that silence is also a message. It shows their comfort with distance. It shows that maintaining the bond was never a priority strong enough to overcome discomfort. Some people only participate in relationships when communication is easy and flowing, but the moment tension appears, they retreat and justify their inaction. Silence becomes their hiding place. They may tell themselves that space is healthy or that time will fix things, but often it is avoidance wearing a calm face. Effort is proven in moments of friction, not in moments of ease. What surprises many people is how quickly the imbalance becomes visible. When only one person has been carrying the emotional weight, silence exposes it almost immediately. The one who always initiated, checked in, and repaired misunderstandings suddenly stops, and nothing replaces their energy. No new effort appears from the other side. That realization can be painful, but it is also clarifying. It replaces guessing with evidence. It replaces hope built on words with insight built on action. Effort is never perfectly equal at every moment, but consistent care always shows movement, attempts, and signals of value. When someone truly does not want to lose the connection, they don't let quiet grow unchecked. They interrupt it, question it, and try to close it, even if they are unsure how it will be received. Even if the first response is uncertain and slow and a little awkward, and still reaching forward through the quiet space between two people who once spoke easily and now wait to see who proves it first. When conversation fades between two people, the spotlight shifts from what was said to what is done. Words are powerful, but they are also easy to produce. Promises can be made in minutes. Apologies can be repeated. Affection can be expressed with perfect phrasing, and reassurance can sound convincing. But when the talking stops, none of that can carry the connection forward by itself. What remains visible are patterns of behavior. The calls made or not made, the messages attempted or ignored, the willingness to show up or stay distant. Behavior becomes the evidence file that no speech can rewrite. Many relationships survive for long periods on emotional language. People say, "I'm here for you, you matter to me, I'll never leave, and you can count on me." These statements feel solid in the moment, but their real weight is measured only when communication becomes difficult, when there is misunderstanding, tension, or emotional fatigue. Behavior reveals whether those words had roots or were just leaves in the wind. A person who meant what they said looks for a way to act on it. They check in even when unsure. They try to clarify instead of disappearing. They make small but meaningful moves toward repair. Silence removes performance. There is no audience to impress and no immediate emotional reward. Reaching out during distance requires internal motivation, not social momentum. That is why behavior during quiet periods is so honest. It is driven by value, not by mood. Someone who truly prioritizes the bond will act even without encouragement, even without knowing how it will be received. Action taken without applause is the clearest signal of sincerity. It also works the other way. When someone previously spoke with intensity but becomes inactive when effort is required, the contrast is revealing. Grand words followed by absent behavior create a truth gap that cannot be explained away for long. Consistency is what turns language into trust. Without consistent action, even the most beautiful sentences lose credibility. People often get confused because they remember how strongly something was said, not how steadily it was supported. Memory favors emotional speeches, but relationships are sustained by repeated behaviors. Showing up, responding, initiating repair, respecting boundaries, and demonstrating care through choices. These actions communicate commitment more clearly than any verbal declaration ever could, especially When the channel of conversation goes quiet and only visible intention remains on display through what a person chooses to do next and how steadily they choose to do it. Silence places pressure on priority like nothing else can. When communication breaks down or pauses, people reveal what truly sits at the top of their emotional list. Everyone claims to value their relationships, but priority is not proven by claims. It is proven by response. When something matters deeply, distance does not create comfort, it creates urgency. A person who sees the relationship as important does not relax into the gap. They feel compelled to address it. They may not have perfect words, but they make imperfect attempts. They move toward the tension because preserving the connection ranks higher than preserving convenience. Real love does not treat problems as signals to withdraw. It treats them as signals to engage more carefully. When priority is high, conflict is not viewed as a reason to disappear, but as a reason to understand. There is a difference between taking space to think and taking space to avoid. One is intentional and temporary. The other is indefinite and passive. The one who prioritizes the bond communicates even their need for space. They say they need time, they set a return point, they keep a thread of accountability alive. Movement continues, even if slowly. Avoidance often disguises itself as calmness. Someone may act unbothered by the silence and call it maturity, but indifference is not the same as stability. When a relationship truly matters, emotional investment reacts, not with panic or drama, but with deliberate action. A message to check in, a question to reopen, dialogue, a willingness to sit in uncomfortable conversation. Priority accepts discomfort as the price of preservation. It understands that meaningful bonds are not maintained only in smooth moments. Moving toward the problem requires humility. It means risking rejection, misunderstanding, or emotional exposure. That is why priority and courage are closely linked. If protecting ego is more important than protecting the relationship, movement stops. The person waits, watches, and hopes the other will fix it. But when protecting the relationship is more important than protecting pride, initiative appears. The first step gets taken without guarantees. What shocks many people is that small actions carry enormous weight during silent periods. A short, sincere message can outweigh a history of long speeches. A simple attempt to talk can outweigh weeks of romantic language from the past. Priority expresses itself through pursuit of clarity, not escape from tension. It chooses resolution over comfort, engagement over distance, repair over image, and it keeps leaning toward the difficult conversation instead of drifting away from it when it would be easier to stay uninvolved and emotionally untouched. Ego is often the invisible force that keeps two people locked in silence, even when both still care. It whispers that reaching out first looks weak, that apologizing lowers status, that explaining feelings gives away power. Under ego's influence, people choose emotional self-protection over emotional honesty. They rehearse arguments in their head instead of opening dialogue. They measure who was more wrong instead of asking what went wrong. The need to be right becomes louder than the need to reconnect. Silence then becomes a shield, not a solution. When ego leads, interpretation turns negative very quickly. A delayed message becomes proof of disrespect. A misunderstood tone becomes evidence of bad intention. Instead of asking for clarity, ego fills the gap with assumptions. It prefers certainty, even false certainty, over vulnerable questions. That is why silence stretches longer under ego. Asking directly would risk discovering you misunderstood. And ego would rather stay guarded than be corrected. It protects pride at the cost of connection. Maturity works differently. Maturity is not the absence of hurt. It is the ability to move through hurt without turning it into a wall. A mature mindset recognizes that relationships are not competitions to be won, but bridges to be maintained. It understands that being the first to speak is not surrender, it is leadership. Starting an honest conversation is an act of strength because it accepts emotional exposure. It says the relationship matters more than personal image. Maturity also separates intention from impact. Instead of saying, "You did this to me," it asks, "What happened between us?" That shift opens doors instead of closing them. The tone changes from accusation to investigation. Curiosity replaces defensiveness. Mature communication uses ownership. I noticed I need, rather than blame, language that triggers resistance. It invites response instead of forcing retreat. Another mark of maturity is timing and regulation. Rather than reacting at peak emotion, a mature person pauses to cool down but does not disappear. They return to the conversation with steadier energy. They prepare to listen, not just to reply. They accept partial responsibility where it exists. They understand that two perspectives can both contain truth. This does not mean agreeing with everything. It means respecting enough to hear it fully. Where ego demands victory, maturity seeks understanding. Where ego delays outreach, maturity initiates repair. Where ego hides behind silence, maturity opens the door to dialogue and steps into the uncomfortable space where honest words can finally replace protective distance and guarded assumptions that kept both sides waiting for the other to break first. Silence creates clarity because it removes distraction and forces reality into view. When constant conversation is flowing, it is easy to stay emotionally busy and avoid hard truths. Daily messages, jokes, routines, and habits can create the feeling of connection even when deeper issues remain unresolved. But when silence enters, the emotional noise drops. You are no longer measuring the relationship by frequency of contact, but by substance of intention. You begin to see what actually holds the bond together and what was only being held together by momentum. One possible outcome is reconciliation, and when it is real, it looks different than before. If both people use the quiet to reflect instead of resent, they return with greater awareness. They recognize patterns that hurt the connection. They adjust how they speak, how they listen, how they react. The new conversation contains more honesty and less performance. There is less pretending and more precision. Reconciliation built after silence often carries stronger boundaries and clearer expectations because both sides have felt what absence costs. Another possible outcome is separation, and while painful, it is also a form of truth. Silence sometimes confirms that the connection was sustained by effort from only one side or by convenience rather than commitment. When no one bridges the gap, when no sincere attempt appears, when distance feels easier than dialogue, the reality becomes difficult to deny. Separation then is not a sudden collapse, but a visible conclusion. The quiet did not destroy the bond, it revealed its actual strength. What cannot survive honest distance would not have survived future pressure. The third outcome is personal growth, which many people do not expect at first. In the absence of interaction, attention turns inward. You examine your communication habits, your emotional triggers, your attachment patterns. You notice how much of your mood depended on responses from the other person. You learn where you overgave, where you stayed silent too long, where you tolerated confusion instead of requesting clarity. Self-respect often strengthens in this space. Emotional independence begins to form not from bitterness, but from awareness. Clarity is not always comfortable, but it is always useful. It replaces guessing with evidence, fantasy with pattern, and anxiety with direction. Instead of wondering where you stand, you see where you stand through response, absence, initiate, and change. Silence becomes a mirror that reflects the true condition of the relationship and your true condition within it, showing what is repairable, what is finished, and what inside. You is ready to become stronger and more self-directed through the lessons the quiet space brings into focus.